Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada with the support of Omnovos, Canada's digital customer engagement company. Omnovos makes personalization easy by helping you connect with your customers, connect with your data, and connect with your systems. Learn how at www.realcustomerengagement.com. In this episode, I'm in Ohsweken on the Six Nations of the Grand River, celebrating Small Business Week in Canada with Dakota Brant, CEO of Sapling Flint, a jewelry manufacturer and retailer specializing in gold and sterling silver. We talk about how Dakota and her business stands out in a crowded market, what makes this award-winning retailer successful, and key elements important to Indigenous makers and retailers here in Canada. Next, we hear from Erik Qualman, best-selling author of 7 books on his latest, The Focus Project. Erik talks about the time vampires and taking control of your life to help you step fully into your story. But first, let's hear from Dakota. Dakota, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this morning?
I'm having a good day. Just sitting here in my office. It's a little bit rainy here, but I don't know, maybe in November it might start bugging me. I did live on the West Coast for a couple years there, so it doesn't bother me as much anymore.
Well, you know what they say about when you walk in the West Coast or Vancouver or any of those cities, anyone's carrying an umbrella, you know they're a tourist, right?
Yeah. That's true. The one thing I did do there's 2 unique things I could talk about the rain and the West Coast. One, I never ever bought rain boots because I just never did, but everybody does have them. And another thing too, because I worked for government, so downtown Vancouver, and I'm walking into the Scotia Bank building every single day. Well, another thing I noticed about Vancouverites, your traditional Vancouverites, they all wear black raincoats. All black. And I made a specific point of buying a bright red raincoat, and I would be the one person with out of 5 or 6 on the elevator going up every day with that's a different color. And so I'm like, every day is so dark and gloomy here because the clouds with the mountains and the landscape there, the clouds feel really close to the ground, and you just feel like you're indoors even though you're outside. Everything else is dark. I'm going to wear bright red.
Well, listen, thanks again for joining me. Why don't we jump in? Tell us first about yourself, your personal journey. You're an entrepreneur, you're a speaker, you're a volunteer firefighter. I wouldn't be surprised if you told me you were an astronaut tho, based on all the great things that you've been doing and accomplished. And tell us a bit about your journey up to and including the founding of Sapling and Flint.
I know I feel like I wear many hats a lot of times if you want to put mom on top of that. Sapling and Flint just came out of being like a coming together of the talents of both myself and my twin sister, Jessie. So we're both the co-founders of our brand. Previous to that, I am university educated. I got my master's degree in community planning from the University of British Columbia, and I worked for government when I was in British Columbia as well for a couple of years. I know it seems kind of funny that I have a master's degree in planning, and for some reason I went into entrepreneurship and a business instead that has nothing to do with community planning. But I still do take on that work. I do provide facilitation services still on the side on top of being a retail person. So I have I've still maintained relationships along the West Coast. I still do go to communities who are looking for facilitation services or something with community communication strategies, those sort of things that I guess community planners are kind of prepped to be able to assist communities with. But when I came home after my education there, I also went to McGill University. I spent my last semester of my master's degree at McGill, though I did an exchange to Montreal. And then when I came home, still doing facilitation work and speaking engagement opportunities when I could. I've always wanted to be able to build my career around my life as opposed to my life around my career. There's things I envisioned about my life, even what kind of house I wanted to have, what kind of car I wanted to drive, what values that I have as a Mohawk woman, wanting to be able to speak my language, teach it to my children, be able to go to ceremony, which basically meant, it meant that I wanted a community life, a life in my community here at Six Nations of the Grand River. So what I ended up doing was just, I already had this background in a way in business anyway, because I've been my own business advocate as an entrepreneur. I've already done website building. So my sister Jessie, she's a college trained goldsmith, and she had just been out of college, and she was doing goldsmithing as a hobby, more or less, because she was a full-time firefighter. But so we started, and also we were also just both artists to begin with. Like I've been a master regalia maker for a number of years as well. So we started doing this as a hobby, I guess, just, like designing accessories, that sort of thing for people. Jessie's making earrings, and we're selling them at the craft shows, powwows, and to family and friends, those sort of things. But then in 2016, I became pregnant with my son. And that just started to be the question, or asking the question, right? Is this just a hobby for us, or is it something that we want to pursue? Because now that I have a child on the way, I need to start thinking about the roots of my career, my career options. What's going to help me be grounded enough to raise a toddler? I can't just jump on flights as the way I could before, visiting communities. And while I still do, I've just very much had to hold back on that, knowing that I have a baby to think about. So we just decided to go full time with Sapling and Flint in Six Nations. The thing about On Reserve is that retail space, real estate, is very, very rare. When it does happen, the spaces are usually taken up for 10 years, 15 years. So those businesses they're there and they stay there. And so very much like seeing real estate open in this community is like, it's like a unicorn, unless you build your own plaza yourself. It's like, what other options do you have? But there was a jewelry store in our prime real estate location here in Ashwegan that was they were retiring, like they just closed up. And right at the exact same time that me and Jesse are just deciding to go full time. So we just pursued it, got into the space. We kind of we had another business name before, but we decided to rebrand ourselves to Sapling and Flint. So we launched kind of like the new website, the new store, all at the same time in April of 2017. And we've been just in operation as Sapling and Flint full time ever since.
And so describe Sapling and Flint a little bit more for us. So obviously jewelry and other products. I've looked at your site, wonderful product, but tell me the different elements. So you have a retail business, so you go to market online, and you've got a physical store. And is that a good description of the business as it sits today? Are you doing any wholesale? Like, give us a quick overview of the business as you see it today.
Okay, so Sapling and Flint is it's a 100% Haudenosaunee women-owned jewelry manufacturer that specializes in gold and sterling silver. And we also do other accessories too, but I will describe, more what the vision is as opposed to the steps to get there, because we did used to sling T-shirts a couple of years ago too. It's like we got from T-shirts to get to the point where, now we can actually hold inventory of 10-karat gold. It takes you a while to get there when you're working on your own resources on reserve, which can be limiting. So we are a full service online. We have a gallery here in Six Nations. So our flagship location, I'll call it. And our aspiration, especially this year, but because of COVID, was to get into wholesale accounts. That was because we do aspire to have our sterling silver collections in all the places that Canadians and tourists to Canada would want to see authentic Indigenous products. So your art galleries, your museums, anywhere where quality sterling silver jewelry can be found. Airports, even if you remember those. That was always the dream, walking by all those kiosks, and that one kiosk right there where everything is made in Asia, it could be made in Canada.
Well, I love the idea, because I know when I travel, I look for something authentic from the place that I'm in, versus, there's so much homogeneity around product. It's nice to find something that represents the country or the place that you're coming from, whether it's Vancouver, Dublin, Ireland, or wherever, right?
And the tough thing in Canada is, I always have my American Indian counterparts to look at for inspiration and for support as well too, but they have the benefit of being protected by federal law when it comes around Indian, I guess I would say American Indian handicrafts, arts and crafts. It's against federal law to sell anything that is posing to be American Indian made. So you can't legally sell anything in the United States where you're passing it off as American Indian when it's not American Indian made. So they actually have laws on the books for that in the States. In Canada, we don't. So you can walk past an airport kiosk in Vancouver, Winnipeg, buy yourself some, carved totem poles or some masks or some dream catchers, and every single piece, when you flip it over, it could be made in Indonesia, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing in the books that is wrong with that. And that's a big problem in Canada when you're looking for authenticity.
That's an interesting point to bring up.
In Canada, the onus is on the consumer to know what they're buying is authentic. The onus is on the artist or the producer and the manufacturer, such as myself, to relay that information to the clientele in the best way that I can. Things like the CCAB, the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business, they have that Aboriginal business certification that we do use in our product. Those things help, but at the same time too, a lot of the work out there that you will find are not being authentic or reflective of the community, or those the big problem in my mind is just that not that they aren't authentic or Indigenous made, but that those funds are being taken away as opportunities for Indigenous people in their communities. Those dollars are not coming back to our communities, even if they might look like something that came from our community. And that's the big issue. And the support on in terms of laws on the book just really isn't there.
You're an award-winning retailer. In 2019 PayPal Small Business Competition, that's a fantastic achievement. And the 2018 Powwow Pitch Competition, another great achievement. I saw that was with, I think it was Royal Bank. Yeah, so award-winning retailer, what is it that in both of those competitions do you think set you apart from probably lots of great folks who are up for that award? Anything that what is it that stood out to the judges, do you think, about Sapling and Flint that made them go, wow, this is something we should put our time and treasure behind?
Time and treasure. I like that. Well, the big things for me that I guess if I would point out are the selling points, because, I did have to write a written statement for the PayPal business competition, or the Powwow pitch competition was, it was a pitch, but I feel like the statements I made were similar, following through with each other. One was just getting to realize that, you're a business that's starting or looking to scale, being clear about those things. Which one is it? What can you actually do with the amount of money that is being offered to you? Because it's tough to go into a business competition and just saying, with just $100,000, I'll be able to launch my business. And they'll be like, well, we can give you $5,000. What can you do with that? and so
that was the Powwow pitch competition, right? It was $5,000.
Yeah. So just like scaling your pitches to meet the competition to where you're at. What can be effective for you? And the Powwow pitch, which was great about that, was the mentorship, which I think gets downplayed a lot in the competition at large, because really I'm like, you don't know how effective that mentorship is until you've actually been in the pitch yourself. So what happens is you do your initial pitch. The first round of selectees are selected. They are given access to mentorship. And the mentorship I received was from like a business manager named Tamer from RBC. What I loved about it was, again, like I went to him with an effective business plan, and he was the one that gave me that advice. He goes, "Okay, well, it looks like you're asking for $35,000, but he's like, well, what can you do with $5,000 that will be useful?" Right. And so and then he just quickly said, well, it looks like you need this piece of equipment, that piece of equipment, and that will be the difference between you pushing out 5 or 6 pieces of jewelry a day to 50 to 75, and I was like, yeah, you're right. And he goes, that sounds to me these pieces of equipment would be very transformational to you. And when he used that word, it just clicked for me, right? I was like, transformational, what can $5,000 do for you as much as possible when what you actually need is 50,000, So when it comes to these pitch competitions, or even online, like PayPal's was the written statement, making sure that your business or understand it enough to know what's going to be helpful where and when, especially knowing that most business pitch competitions aren't going to give you enough for what you need to, launch or to scale, right? But it helps the judges know that they can help you best when you understand those numbers or those aspects of your business plan yourself. And
so it allows both you and the judges to hone in on that one thing that this competition could make a difference with your business, right? I mean, as you said, $5,000 can be transformational to a small business because it allows you to buy, as in your case, a piece of equipment that takes you from production of X to production of X plus
exponential
plus Y plus Y. Yeah, right on. And what are for you, in your mind, are the top 3 elements that make your business successful on an ongoing basis? You've got some physical presence. It looks like you've got a great site. Is it mastering the world of online retail, production? What are the kind of the 3 key elements that you think are contributing to your success?
In terms of online or just in general?
Just in general. No, in general. I mean, I clearly successful both from an award-winning perspective, but also from an ongoing perspective. Yeah.
Well, I guess it could apply to both, but when we're talking about moving forward with the kind of products that I have is how much Canadians and let's just say Generation X are millennials are, how much they're valuing authenticity and the story of brands. Brands who tell their stories speak a lot more to these generations who are coming up and wanting to know that their dollars are contributing to something more than just consumerism. It's hard for a fashion house to launch in the way that it did even 50 years ago. Whereas back then it was like, buy our brand because we scream luxury, and you're at the front line of luxury and what is in vogue. Those kind of words were popping out in the older generations, but now people are starting to ask questions. Well, who's making the product? Who's benefiting financially? What communities are being supported by these juggernaut fashion houses that are pushing out as much fashion as they possibly can quickly? And while those sort of brands do still exist and they're juggernauts, absolutely, moving forward from now on, in the retail and in the online e-commerce space, having a story as a brand and an authentic voice is what's speaking to people who use e-commerce increasingly for how they access brands. To me, sharing those things, actually me and Jesse started a YouTube channel where we bring people into our studio to watch handcrafted items being made. They can start to see that, our products aren't being made somewhere else. They are being made by Indigenous hands in an Indigenous community, financially benefiting and bringing economic opportunity to Indigenous people here in Grand River. I think that's been a huge part of the success for us, especially online, and doing the things that people might not have thought about before e-commerce was so big. Like making sure that you have good lighting, making sure you have good photography, making sure that you're keeping up with content, because content is just consumed so quickly and so much by people online today. Those are the kind of investments that you want to make, even especially if you're a small business, because we don't necessarily have the budget to hire and spend thousands of dollars on a marketing company to come in to do photography for us and to do these things for us. We just don't have the resources to do that. So to make sure that I can spend $500 on one photo shoot for somebody else to do for me, or I can spend that same amount of money on a camera and figure out how to use it myself.
Yeah. That gets back to that time and treasure, right? As an entrepreneur, is both things, right? Are finite. It's interesting to hear you describe the importance of content. I want to talk about all the services I always reflect. I launched Hudson's Bay e-commerce site in 1999, 2000. So back in the day, and it was it's a big lift to even take a credit card online. So the good news is there's sites. I think you're on a Shopify platform. I think. Yeah. There's sites like Shopify, there's payment mechanisms like PayPal, online marketing tools, Google. Is there anything missing from your perspective? Like, as you sit today, is there anything you need to make your life better? You've already highlighted one really interesting thing, which is from a legislative perspective.
I can tell you right now how I won PayPal. Is because one of the questions, because they asked 3 questions in the entries, and I don't know if it's necessarily one that won it, but it was definitely a unique answer that they got. Question number 3 out of the 3 that they asked was, what can PayPal do to make a better experience for customers and clientele online? And so that's what they were asking the entries into this competition. And the one thing that I said that to this day I stand by is important, that these POS systems or online transaction systems, companies, PayPal, Shopify, need to be able to start taking Indian status cards online. Okay. Indigenous people in Canada have a right to exemption from PST with their status cards, because on reserve there is no PST, there is no provincial resources that come to reserves or Indigenous communities, so we don't pay that PST because of it. We pay GST, which everybody pays. Right. And so if no resources from a province go to the reserve, then there's no point in us paying provincial tax. And so that being said, Indigenous people are the same as every other demographic. We're shopping increasingly online, and we're also picking and choosing based upon who is able to take our status cards so that we can deliver our products to the reserve. And so, to me, I made the business argument to PayPal. There's 1.4 million Indigenous people in Canada, even, 1 million of them with status cards, and we're the fastest growing demographic of young people under the age of 29 in the country. And every single one of those people 29 and old and younger are shopping online, and they're going to be using the transaction systems that are going to be accepting their status cards, where we contribute $11 billion a year to the economy as a demographic. That $11 billion is going to be going to the ones that that are accepting status cards. So
well, in my competition, like everything else, make it easier, right?
Yeah,
that reduce the friction, so to speak, right?
Yeah. So in my PayPal pitch, like I made that business argument, not just for me as a retailer, but for them as a transaction juggernaut. I'm like, here's $11 billion you can or you may or may not have access to based on whether or not you're making the experience and friendly for Indigenous people to shop online. I'm an on-reserve operating, manufacturing, production, but not all Indigenous businesses are that way. Many of them are off-reserve, and so they do have to take the status cards from people. And but again, it is working around like where you probably have to call them and they have to fill out a form and do the like if there was again. We're spending our time trying to make the transaction process as seamless as possible through e-commerce. This is another aspect that can be being put forward by these economies, and really, it's worth billions. It's in the billions that could be having an impact. But it's the difference between me buying from that company or buying from this company is which one of them is going to take my status card.
Well, all right. Let's last question for you. 3 tips. For thinking about your younger self a couple of years ago, you've given some great advice around focus and what you do and how you do it. But what are your top 3 tips? There's a lot of small retailers across the country who kind of had a toe in the water of e-commerce, for example. But when the pandemic hit, it really brought home the need to really focus on that. For example, I mean, you mentioned tourism. There's not a lot of tourists in this country. These days, obviously, and that may continue for quite a while. So, knowing what you now know from both how you were thinking about the business pre-COVID to how you're thinking about the business in the COVID era, any tips for folks like yourself, retailers thinking about doing business in here and across the nation? I
guess the top advice would be if you're not online yet, then you need to be. If you expect, if your plan or your aspiration is for your business to grow. That would be number 1. Number 2 is even if you personally aren't going to be in charge of your online presence, like maybe you have an employee or a staff that's going to be doing that work for you, you still should have a basic understanding of the experience of how to put yourself online. Because if you don't understand or shop online yourself, then you probably won't fully understand what the experience is going to be like for your clients. So we spend a lot of time as restaurant owners or art galleries or brick and mortar stores focused on the experience that our customers have when they come into our store. You need to be doing that same thing for the customer experience online. How seamless is it? Does it feel like it's warm and inviting? Does the brand that you've created reflect, does your website reflect the personality of your brand? Basically, are people going to your brand having the experience that you would expect for them to have in your brick and mortar location as well? The more you understand these things, you don't have to be a big computer genius, because I'm not at all. But if you cover at least these things, then you're going to know. Then the big thing that it's coming down to is what's the experience of your customer and what's going to get them in to the shopping cart and to checking out. It's going to be what kind of experience that they're going to have on your website. Because if it's not a good one, then they're probably not going to finish that transaction, right? Yeah, right on. Well, listen, you've been great explaining your tradecraft, both in how you think about going to market and what's important. I loved your reflection on content and all the different elements that make you successful. So listen, thanks for being on the Voice of Retail podcast, Dakota. It was a real pleasure getting to know your business, and I wish you much continued success in this year and in the years to come. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really appreciate it. If anybody out there is interested in our content, we're on Instagram at Sapling and Flint, and then also our website is saplingandflint.ca. Fantastic, and I can attest it's a wonderful product, and I visited your Instagram. It's great. It's a great visit. So for the listeners out there, be sure and check it out. So thanks again, Dakota. Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Hi, this is Trin Tam, Chief Marketing Officer at Harry Rosen. We're of the opinion that to truly do your best, you need to feel your best. That's why we've started our Set the Tone webinar series, which invites key thought leaders and role models to chat about current events, their passions, and how they set the tone for their personal and professional lives. Join us for lively and informative discussions throughout the fall and winter season with our host Michael LeBlanc, the producer and host of 3 podcasts, The Voice of Retail, The Remarkable Retail, and The Food Professor. Our first episode will debut Monday, October the 5th, live online or for viewing after the live session at harryrosen.com. To learn more and register, please visit harryrosen.com or click on the link right in the show notes of this podcast. We look forward to seeing you.
Erik, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing?
It's great. I'm loving being here. So thanks for having me on.
Well, it's my pleasure. We were saying off mic, we first met in Vancouver at a Retail Council of Canada event several years ago, actually. So I've been following your career and watching what you've been writing. You got a new book. We want to talk about that. And I'm just so thrilled that we can spend the time together chit and chat. And so why don't we just jump right in? I know a little bit about you just because we've met and I've stayed connected. But for the benefit of the listeners, if you could tell us a little bit about your personal professional journey and the work you do today.
Vancouver. I wish I could be there right now. What a beautiful place.
We wish you could host you there.
I wish. Yeah, I haven't grown up in Detroit. Obviously, Canada is near and dear to my heart. What I've been doing for the last 10 years is writing books. And unfortunately, people want to hear me speak about the content of these books on stage. Prior to that, I was always in the digital space. It just so happened, as I mentioned, I grew up in Detroit, and I was just the young intern when they had these things called websites. I needed Cadillac.com, and they said, "You're young. Can you get us this thing called a website?" And kind of funny to laugh about now, but just I loved it. I loved it when digital was so tiny. There was only like 5% of anything that anyone did. And now it's everything, especially with the pandemic. And so that's really what my go-to has been is digital. But I also understand that, human technology changes every second, but human nature never does. So I'm always a big Flintstones and Jetsons guy, to use kind of American cartoons, that it's really just digital leaders understand it's that combination of those two things. It's that offline and the online coming together.
It's I really think about your story, your origin story about the Cadillac in Detroit, because I was with Black & Decker in Baltimore. I was with Black & Decker in Canada, and they were starting to build this thing, a website, and they'd called it BD Home or some crazy thing like that. And I said, why don't you just call it blackanddecker.com? And they're like, you look like you know something. I said, well, I read Wired magazine. That's it. You're in charge of the website. Like it was so, back in the day, right? If you read Wired magazine, you were like the internet guru or something.
You had everything. It was so much easier to stay abreast of everything because you could read Wired and Red Herring, and then now it's impossible to stay abreast of everything. So don't even try.
Well, I guess that's a good segue into your new book, The Focus Project, because really it captured, I have to tell you this funny story. I was, last night it was about, I said, I read through the galley version and I wanted to start preparing questions. And then it was 3:30 in the morning and and then I started reading your book. I'm like, I shouldn't be doing this. Oops. I'm doing exactly what you're describing. Like exactly. It was like you had a window on my office at home. But tell us about the book. Tell us about the Focus Project and what was the genesis of the book, and give us a top line overview, and then we'll delve into it a bit.
Yeah, the Focus Project, the book is the not so simple art of doing less better. And so like myself and your listeners, I would find myself every day feeling like my hair was on fire. I was running 100 miles an hour, but it felt like I was on a treadmill. And here I was, I kind of can create my own schedule. So I go, oh my gosh, if I am struggling with this, how is everyone else dealing with this? And so fortunately, I'm able to interact with CEOs, the school teachers, to stay at home mom and dads. And I found out there's a pattern. Over 80% of us have time famine. And so we get stressed because we don't have enough time. And so I figured out that it's not that we lack time, it's that we lack priority. And so I wanted to dig into, to help myself have a reader of one, this be a resource for me. But if I'm a reader of one, there's probably others that I saw that needed this as well. Again, I uncovered that 80% of us feel like we have time famine. And so I just wanted to figure out, how do we focus in this unfocused world? And so I took a year to do a project each month attacking one specific item of focus, and then put all my learnings, what worked for me, what didn't. Here's what the science shows, and then here's what my street science shows. And so marrying those two together, and then all of a sudden we've got this pandemic that hits us, and lo and behold, people might be physically okay, but all of a sudden they're mentally not okay because they don't know where to focus. There's all this change around them, and we don't deal well with change. So all of a sudden, this thing becomes a number one release on Amazon because everyone needs it, or they know someone that needs it.
Well, I love the format too. I mean, the 12 chapters, each chapter like a calendar, kind of an opening and closing. I mean, just from reading a lot of books and looking at the way you wrote it, I really find that interesting. And again, I love your idea because I've always thought throughout my career, how many pitches have you been in when they said, the time-starved consumer? And I'm like, if you compared the amount of stuff and how we get it done today to 40 years ago when our parents were doing it, there should be way more time. There's a lot of things that we do today that were very time consuming that just happened, that just happened today. So where'd all that time go? So that's what I found particularly compelling about the book. And again, why it resonated. Talk about a couple of concepts. And there's lots of concepts in this book. I mean, it's I'd encourage anybody to read it, and it's available. Is it available now? Like we're talking here in mid-October. Is it available?
Yeah, it's available where all books are sold. So Perfect. It's available anywhere you want to get it.
Perfect. I'll put a link in the show notes to a couple of sites in Canada, just as a suggestion. I'll go find that for you. Talk about a couple of concepts specifically that I found interesting. You talk about time famine. I was attracted to the concept of time vampires. And this 3-minute rule. So tell us a couple, those are just two examples. You've got plenty of them. What are your favorite examples?
Yeah, some of the top concepts that I find myself using today. And so I always graded myself each month. So each month I was taking something on. And at the end of each month, I'd grade myself like a kindergartner. So I got an A, B, C. And of the 12 months, I only got 2 A's. And so that was a big learning that is a reinforcement that focus is really hard. But the other learning is that focus can be learned. It can become a habit. So the hope is that when we cover some of the concepts, pick out what works well for you. And so one tactical item that works for me that I use almost every day, again, we're trying to go for progress, not perfection. I said almost every day, because I'm not going to sit here and say I've perfected this. You still wrestle with it. There's a gravitational pull each and every day to get unfocused. And so one thing that I use most days is I just write down what's the one thing that makes everything else easier or unnecessary. So if I nail this one thing, it makes everything else either easier or unnecessary. And that's true at a personal level, and it's also very powerful on a business level. When you have all these different initiatives, it's really like, what's the one thing that if we do it well, makes everything else either easier or necessary? And it can also be outside of the business world. For example, if you're trying to raise money for your local school, you probably have a big gala. And if you nail that night, you're good. Like it covers everything.
Right.
And you probably have all these bake sales and all these little selling things throughout the year, maybe hundreds of other different initiatives. Where let's say you nail those 100, but don't nail the gala, it's not going to work. Where the inverse is true is that if you nail the gala, then it makes up for any shortcomings you have on all those other 100 initiatives. And so you shouldn't equally weight things. It's really just about, I always write down, what's that one thing that if I do it well, it makes everything else either easier or unnecessary.
What's this time vampires you talk about? Tell me about that.
Yeah, this is a new concept because you alluded to it earlier that where does all this time go? Because we are more productive than we ever have been because of all automation and because of digital tools. There's a economist in the 1930s that wrote, because of advances in technology, they would only be working 15 hours a day. Interesting enough, they actually...
that hasn't worked out exactly the way...
Yeah, he never had any offspring, but he had like a sister and a brother, so they followed their offspring. And it turns out those offspring worked on average 60 hours a day. Completely wrong. Yeah. But if you think about it, what happened? And a major issue that we all wrestle with is time vampires. And so that means that when we have 10 minutes here or 15 minutes there, we kind of go to our technology because it's easy. It feels like we're being productive if we're answering email. If we're getting our email down from 90 to 70, we feel like we're being productive. When you should use those 15 to 10 minutes, it's like a Swiss cheese approach, right? That even though you only have a small amount of time, how can I put holes in that block that I'm trying to attack? That big thing. So again, think big, not busy. So think big, not busy. A lot of us, me included, I'd always go, well, if I'm working on that most important thing, I need that 30 minutes. I don't have 30 minutes right now to write, so I just won't write. Where you got to inverse that and go, I've got 10 minutes, I'm going to write, instead of going to my digital device. And so easier said than done, but that's what we want to do. Those are those time vampires. They add up over time. All those 10, 15, 5-minute segments throughout the day are sucking your time dry. That's why I call them time vampires.
One of the, my wife and I have this debate about how to handle email. I'm not sure it's exactly a debate. So I'm of the school that I almost never delete anything because I find deleting a waste of time. Now, the downside to that, I'm just checking out my count here. I have 174,065 emails in Gmail, which, can
how
be
many?
174,065.
But those are just not deleted. They're just, are they read? Are they unread? Are they marked unread?
They are a mix of read and unread as I because I never delete anything. So I used to search. My initial idea was, spending endless amount of time deleting emails wasn't effective. But I don't know. I'm starting to think about, what do you think? Should I be more diligent about deleting and managing emails, or should I just let it flow and let technology, allow me to find what I'm looking for?
I would archive them. So that's a beautiful invention they came up with many moons ago, was to archive them. So you don't have to delete them. I would archive them. But yeah, when you can, I would delete. But since the servers usually take on more than you could ever archive in your lifetime, then if you ever need to go find it, it's archived. And so that keeps your inbox clean, which is important, because some of the research that we showed is that if you dig into it, it's a messy desk, whether it's physical or whether it's digital makes you less productive. And so there's actually productivity enhancements when you're organized. And so some people think, well, I don't have time to organize. It'll actually save you time long-term for being organized, not only from being able to find the stuff, obviously that's intuitive, but more from the standpoint of when there's a cluttered desk is a cluttered mind. And that's true of your inbox as well. So both the physical and the digital side of things. So
this book isn't your first book, and I'm curious as to how the Focus Project connects to your prior work, particularly Socialnomics. I think that was your last book. The two seem connected in a way to me. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, Socialnomics. So Socialnomics was my first book. And then when you write a book, you always it spurs an idea for another book. And so now we've got 7 books. This is the 7th book in that line. But if you look at the first one, it does tie directly back to Socialnomics in the terms of Socialnomics. When I wrote that book, not many people were on social media. It's mainly for teenagers. And so I wrote it, said, this is the way social media changed the way we live and do business. Letting people know that this is going to change the way governments function, change the way we elect people, change the way you communicate, change the way that businesses run. It's not just for teenagers. And so I was essentially imploring people to get into that technology. Now, what happened is that everyone got too far into their phones, too far into their technology. And so in some ways, ironically enough, the Focus Project's an anti-venom to my first book. The technology is not inherently bad. The technology is inherently good. But if we use it the wrong way, it can have, in some instances, actually deadly consequences. So it's really just about how do we focus in this unfocused world. So it does tie to Socialnomics from a standpoint of, all right, I told you to kind of get in this technology, but you went too far. You're not using it the right way.
It was very prescient of you because as you're talking through the terms, many years ago, not everyone kind of understood the full impact of social media. As you say, much social media starts young, but then it ages. Look at TikTok, right? At first it was just for tweens, and now these kind of social things age, as we like to say. You've mentioned a couple of times writing. I'm curious. I always ask writers how they approach their trade craft. So I did 2 interviews stand out, and this will be my third, so it'll be interesting. Dan Pink, who you may know, has written a bunch of books.
Dan's great.
Yeah, he's fantastic. I met him in Toronto, and I asked him on the podcast, how does he write? And he's got I set an objective for the number of words, and I don't do anything until I hit that. Now, I just interviewed Roger Martin, one of the leading global strategists, and he was a dean of my university business school, and he approaches it completely different. He says, listen, I don't write a lot at first because I find a lot of that gets wasted. I build a book. In other words, I start with point form, and then he goes up from there. Tell me about your trade craft. How do you sit down and write and bring focus to your work?
That's a good question. And I even mentioned Dan in the book. We're at an event together recently, but his work's fantastic. So feel free to check it out, all you listeners, if you hadn't been exposed to Dan Pink or Daniel Pink. Everyone writes differently, so you're probably going to get that thread. For me, I started off with I needed to do a certain amount of words, and that didn't work for me. What did work for me is just making sure once I'm in that writing zone, hey, we're going to write for this year a book, then to stay as much as possible, don't miss a day. So I'd carve out 30 minutes in the morning. And this relates to the Focus Project, because I say attack the day before it attacks you. That you've got to do it a lot of times in the morning, because that's your power hour. An hour after you wake up is when your brain, for most of us, is most efficient. And so you don't want to waste that hour on doing something that's easy, like email. You want to use that power hour as much as possible. And so I go 30 minutes minimum. Some days that stretches into 2 hours, but just blocking that time in the morning. And if I write, some days I write a sentence, and it might not even be a very good sentence. Other day I might write 3,000 words that aren't very good. And then other days you write 3,000 words that are amazing. And so for me, it's just really making sure I stay in that zone. It saves a lot of working back to figure out where you are. That's what I found out that didn't work well for me if I took like a month off from writing on a specific book. And so I got away from the word count because it was too much pressure on me. And I'd rather just go 30 minutes. Here's the dedicated time. Let's go.
Yeah, as you mentioned off the beginning, in addition to writing and speaking, you actually wind up talking to a lot of senior level executives. I wanted to get your advice on leadership and how to work and how to focus, but also just how to be, so to speak, in these kind of turbulent times. It was not like we entered the COVID era in a tranquil time of no change. It wasn't like all peaceful. It just got accelerated, and many things are kind of accelerating. So what would be your top 3 pieces of advice for leaders listening to your voice right now about how to navigate these turbulent times based on the work you've done and the research and your insights and just what you've been hearing yourself from your clients?
Number one, don't waste the opportunity, because when you're in a crisis, it's a catalyst for innovation. And so don't waste it. It's a catalyst for innovation right now. Secondarily is things happen for you, not to you. And I can speak of this firsthand. I mean, if anyone that's seen me, you can see I wear these bright green glasses. Mm-hmm. And I haven't always worn those bright green glasses, but something happened for me that allowed me to step into my story. And so all you listeners out there, my hope is that you step fully into your story. And sometimes it's a time like this that allows you, it's that impetus that allows you to step fully into your story. And don't do what I did, which is I resisted it for 15 years. If you hear my name, it's Erik Qualman. So my first initial and last name forms Equalman, and it sounds like a superhero. And so for years, I didn't like it because they'd be like, oh, Equalman can get the coffee. He's super fast. He can go get it. Equalman can work the weekend. He can work really hard because he's got the super strength. Yeah. And then I went to Kenya to give a talk. And a couple of weeks leading up to that talk, I had done a magazine interview and for one of the books, I think it was Digital Leader. And they took a picture for the cover and they came out and said, hey, for this picture, because you got this weird email address, Equalman, do you mind if you wear some Clark Kent-like glasses? And it's our St. Patrick's Day issue. Do you mind if they're green, bright green? And so we take that picture. I don't think much of it. Then we go to Kenya a couple weeks later. The night before I'm going to get on stage, I go to adopt a baby cheetah, not to take home. My wife would kill me, but to just support the local. And the
cheetah might as well, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. They're very friendly. They're actually, if you get into the research, which we have, because obviously she's a sweetheart, but it's they're actually very friendly with humans. But the night before we're driving over, and the lady I'm with looks at me and goes, hey, we filmed Usain Bolt, the Olympian, was here, and he adopted from the same letter you're going to adopt from. We filmed him, and we'd love to film you and put the video together and raise more money for the shelter. And I said, yeah, that sounds great, whatever it takes. And then she looks at me and she goes, but obviously when we film you, we want to make sure that you're wearing your green glasses. And I kind of go, I don't wear green glasses like that. I look like an idiot walking around wearing green glasses all the time. And then she goes, no, everyone in Kenya, that's what they think you look like. And so I never wanted to kind of let everyone down. So I've been long story longer is that I'm now kind of stuck wearing the green glasses, but it's something that happened for me. It allowed me to step fully into my story, and away we go. Like, obviously we don't get business because of it, because people go, I don't want the green glasses guy. We'll take Daniel Pink. But it's also increased our business a lot more. Most importantly, it's increased our impact because we're just trying to empower people to their best life. And so it's something that happened for me, made me step into my story. And I'm telling you this story because I think every one of us is living the same movie. We're just different actors and actresses. And so my hope is your listeners that are out there, whether you're 18 or 80, yesterday was the best day to step into your story. But the second best day is now. Just step into that story. And it's hard. It's uncomfortable stepping into your story. That's why I resisted it for 15 years. But long term, it's the most comfortable place that you can be. And so during a pandemic like this, we've got to understand that sometimes things happen for us, not to us. And for a lot of us, it's a catalyst to kind of allow us to step into our story.
Right on. Well, listen, I wanted to end with a great conversation, by the way. It's a fascinating origin story and great insights. I want to end on ask you two kind of pieces of specific advice. One is leading through Zoom. So many of us, many listeners now have to manage teams more so now in this virtual environment, which has pluses and minuses. And the second thing is, and then this gets back to the, I think they both do, but this gets back to the core essence of the Focus Project is, many people I think will be changing the way they work forever, potentially, based on the COVID era. The COVID era is not going to last forever, but I think the impacts on how we work might. In other words, less time in the workplace, more time at home or alternative locations where focus can be for some a challenge. I just wanted those two pieces of advice on, leading through, because you've also written on leadership and digital and other things on leading through these remote Zoom type calls. And then the second is this, your best advice on how to focus in environments that are chaotic and not exactly work oriented.
Yeah, I think the first one is if you work with any form of team, which we all do, is make sure you check in more than you normally would. And this is a great way to check in. Ask them, how are you doing 1 to 10? And then you get a numerical answer. It's much easier. And they'll say, I'm an 8. And you go, well, how do we get you to a 10? And then they'll divulge it. It's just a better way. If you ask someone how they're doing, you just get good. How's your food? Good. Even if the food's terrible, you just were people pleasers. So you don't really give an answer. And so just check in more and ask, how are you doing 1 to 10? Sometimes you can go, how are you doing 1 to 10? You can't use the number 7 because a lot of people go to 7 because it's a safe number. But if you remove 7, and this is true whether you're checking in with someone or whether you say, how do you like my book? 1 to 10, you can't use 7. Then they have to answer 6, which is pretty bad, or 8, which is pretty good. And so it really makes people make the hard choice and give you an answer. But most importantly, it allows you to help that person. So even if they're at a 9, how do you get to 10? Like what's missing that's not allowing you to get to that 10?
Right.
And so I think that's important to check in, but check in that way. That's a good way to check in from a standpoint of how they're doing overall. In terms of what the future holds, it'll be very fascinating. I agree 100%. We're kind of not going back to work. We're going forward to work. So it's really just that new. There's going to be some stuff that looks similar, but it's going to be a completely different world. I think some stuff will stick and some won't. Like you said, that I think there's now an acceptance that virtual is okay. And part of that's because the broadband's dramatically increased, like a pre-broadband era and a post-broadband era. But I'll always go back to Flintstones and Jetsons. You need that combination, whether that's in education. Like I was fortunate to be at MIT and Harvard when we launched edX.org, which is you can get for free, if you have an internet connection, you can get a Harvard education, you can get a McGill education, you can get a University of Hong Kong education. Over 150 universities are part of edX.org now, originally launched with MIT and Harvard. But if you have an internet connection, you can get an education for free. But the reason I brought that up is because we even saw that needs that blended model. It's really that combination of that offline and that online coming together.
Right on. That's probably one of the things I've heard most from the leaders is they see the workplace being for collaboration and not, the alone time working. It'll be interesting to see if who knows if it evolves just in that way. Well, listen, this was fantastic. As I said off mic, I wish we were doing this in person, but the next best thing, it's great to hear your insights and to connect via this. And thank you for sharing your insights and your wisdom with my listeners. I'll put links to the new book and you can find all your great books in the show notes. And I want to thank you again, Erik, for joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast.
No, thank you. And thank you for your listeners. And next time, we'll hug it out. We'll get that oxytocin. We'll do it in person. That'll mean the world's moved forward, which is great.
Well, thanks to Dakota and Erik for being my guests and Omnovos for their support on this episode. If you like this podcast, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Rate and review. Be sure to recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of LeBlanc Company Inc. You can learn more about me on www.leblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. And until next time, have a safe week.